Kevin Bowen here. Don't forget to listen to The Fan now on 93.5 or 107.5 FM, and check out our latest coverage online at 1075thefan.com.
And welcome back. Another edition of Kevin's Corner. A whole lot to get to on this one. We have heard from the key decision makers, Jim Irsay, Chris Ballard, and Frank Reich over the past week or so. And now into the divisional round of games, 8 left, hoping that this weekend will provide a little bit more entertainment. I think we all deserve that. Wild card weekend, okay. Nothing crazy there on that front. So hopefully we get some good games this Saturday and Sunday. And as always, we'll have Twitter questions. We'll get to a lot of them today, and we'll continue to touch on the offseason list throughout the next couple of weeks and months. A lot of them aren't super time sensitive, so we can save some and don't need to get to all of them today. I try to keep the podcast in the offseason to, an hour, a little less than an hour. But Chris Presley, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I mean, obviously, pardon me. Wow, sorry. Frog in my throat there.
Dude, all good, man.
Obviously would have loved to see our team in this past weekend. And there were some duds in terms of score outcomes, but there's also some great games. And
yeah.
I know you and I both watched all of those this weekend, or as much as we could. And it's still, I like their format this year, the Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
I know.
Give me as much football as you can and as many days as you can, and give me appointment television and a reason to, I can't today. I got something that came up, and that something is the NFL.
I felt like Maddie looked at me last night and was like, wait, there's another game? There's one more. I'm like, yeah, there is. Luckily, she's going out of town this weekend, so Rosie and I will get well acquainted with the Saturday action at least. If you had to pick a Super Bowl matchup that you would like, I'll go first. Financially, I've got some stake in the Bills.
Okay.
And I really love watching Aaron Rodgers play the game of football.
Those are my two.
Really?
Yep.
Wow. Gosh.
Just in terms of what you said.
Originality. We don't strive for that here in Kevin's Corner. Okay, so you have financial stake in the Bills too?
I don't. I've not made any bets in terms of long term, in terms of down the road. I made a couple bets here and there this weekend.
Yeah.
Won some money, so that was good.
There you go.
Anytime you can make up rent in a weekend's time of betting some football,
sure, boy,
you'll take
Chris
it.
Presley.
But yeah, like you said, I don't hate any team that's left in terms of watching them. Obviously, as Colts fans, a lot of us still hold a little bit of a grudge towards Tom Brady. But, my father grew up out in California for a while when he was stationed there in the military, so my brother's a big Niners fan.
Gotcha.
Always love seeing the Cowboys get knocked out. Joe Burrow, love seeing what he can do. Would want them to obviously beat Tennessee. But everyone else, that Bills-Kansas City game is going to be great. So, yeah, just a lot of great matchups. So I don't really care who makes it to the Super Bowl at this point.
Yeah, there definitely was a little bit of like, oh, wow, this 4:30 game's about to start on Saturday, and it's Raiders-Bengals. I felt that from Colts fans I was around, or certainly even on Twitter, reaching out. So let's get into today's podcast. We will break down specifically the Chris Ballard press conference, kind of my main takeaways. I did a 10-takeaway article up on the site, so I won't hit on all of them, but we'll get to the big ones and kind of sprinkle in some other thoughts in the Twitter questions. Chris, feel free to chime in as well with anything that you found interesting, whether it was Reich, Irsay, or Ballard related. Let's start with the most important position in sports, and that would be Carson Wentz. Frank Reich and Chris Ballard are smart people. Chris Presley, they're very smart people. They know what their words say. They know what the words they don't say says.
Right.
They know full well what they said, or again, did not say about Carson Wentz this past week. We had Bob Kravitz on our morning show a little bit earlier today, and I asked him a question of, if you were in the Carson Wentz camp, what would you think about the comments you heard from the general manager and the head coach over the past week? And Bob and I are on the same page in saying, I would think, do we need to sell the house? I don't know how you listen to the comments from Ballard or Reich and don't come away with that thought. The only thing holding it back is the answer of who else. Like, that's not a ringing endorsement on your quarterback. Ballard specifically, Chris, several times, he kind of began things by saying, at the time, I thought it was the right trade, and I still think that. At the time, but whenever you use the phrase "at the time," it kind of gives you like a cop-out, like, well, at the time, I thought taking 10 shots in 28 minutes before going to the bars to meet my friends was a good idea. And then next thing you know, at 3 a.m., I was buying everybody a Qdoba burrito and behind the counter trying to, make a burrito bowl. Like, it just kind of, it gives you a bit of a cop-out.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times in those 60-plus minutes that he first talked about the quarterback position. This is a guy that usually strays away from a little bit of the quarterback-centric talk. And how many times he went unprompted back to needing quarterback play or needing stability from that position. The make the layups comment he said to Carson Wentz. Ballard was referencing him and Wentz's conversation from the day prior. Carson, you got to make the layups.
Yeah.
So true, right? So true. And then the follow-up question was like, do you feel like that's something he can do? And, well, it's something that we've got to talk with our staff. Is it fixable? Something we have to work with Frank and the staff. This is not typical Colts chatter. Like, even when they talked about Brissett, you would always hear them laud him about his leadership and what he meant to the locker room.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we didn't even get that from Wentz. When he talked about the good, he used the word some. He did some good. When he talked about areas to improve, there are a lot to improve on. Like, you could find 7, 8 different times in this press conference where it was just like, whoa. So, yeah, man, I kind of sit here and think to myself, if this were a 3-person vote right now, Jim Irsay and Chris Ballard would be voting no. And I don't even know where Frank Reich would vote. I mean, Reich certainly didn't give vote of confidence. And I'm thinking they're listening to Reich, listening to Ballard, thinking, how much of this is Irsay related from Sunday night? After that Jacksonville game, how much was that Irsay in that room saying, I'm keeping you both, but I'm sick and tired of that quarterback? Maybe it's a far-fetched thought.
You don't know. Could be.
It's a thought that's in my head.
Yeah.
The all chips in comment from Irsay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that was a very, we need anyone walking into West 56th Street, all chips in, as my 747 engine is louder than hell. I'm like, by the way, for the plane people out there, I don't think it's a 747. Very nice plane.
Yeah.
By the way. The all chips in comment, was that Wentz vaccine related? Was it? Obviously, there's other players that weren't vaccinated, but it just, man, it's, I think if there was any semi-connection to the Colts staff or a relatively easy to explain option, Carson Wentz would not be the quarterback in 2022. Now, Brissett to Rivers made sense.
Yes.
Rivers to Wentz made sense. Wentz to... Don't have a great answer for you, Chris. Me talking on January 18th, I think there's some big dominoes to fall. Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson. Not saying any of those guys would be playing quarterback here in Indianapolis next year, but if they go someplace, that could knock that quarterback. So there is kind of a domino game to play here. I would kind of say the most damning thing, and you could probably point to others, but I'm going to go here. The most damning thing that I thought Ballard said, Wentz-related, was Chris's evaluation of the wide receiver group. Chris does not think that the wide receiver position is that big of a problem, maybe even a problem at all. Now, I would disagree with him on that, but that's his opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that opinion matters a whole lot when you're the general manager of the football team. And, Chris, think about that. If Ballard doesn't think wideout's a problem, what does that say about his evaluation of Carson Wentz? Because I think when you hear people say Wentz deserves another year, I think the two biggest reasons are full off season, OTAs, healthy for training camp, second year with Reich, all that. That's kind of reason one. Or I don't know. Honestly, this other reason might be reason one, but that's one of the reasons. The other reason is, hey, he needs better wideouts. He's got to have better pass cut. I mean, look who he's throwing to. And I get that. And I totally agree. You did not support him to the level that you needed to. But when a massive decision maker does not feel like that position group is that big of an issue, that needs to matter in our evaluation process of how we look at this. So, yeah, man, I am just...
Well, you said, you guys have to kind of read between the lines. You kind of have to use some of the breadcrumbs, and like you said earlier in the podcast,
welcome to off-season life.
Yeah, like you said earlier in the podcast, there was a lot of things that he said and didn't say that you kind of took away from. I saw a lot of you guys when you were out there, a lot of you journalists and media members tweeting, especially about the fact that we're now over 60 minutes. How much of what you guys asked him did he just continue to expand on, and how typical is that length normal for?
Yeah, Ballard does a great job in the season-ending presser. 60-plus minutes. I think it was like 66, something like that. That's a long time.
Right.
I asked I think I had 7 or 8 questions that I really wanted to get to. I think I asked 3 or 4 of them, and my fellow colleagues asked the rest of them. So I was content. There's a few follow-ups when you listen to the audio. You're always kind of like, oh, man, I wish I would have. It's hard in this day and age of, like, you're tweeting and you're trying to listen, which, I know no one is crying for me. This is my job, and it's a joke that it's called a job. So I'm very lucky to have it, but that's stuff that I need to figure out on my end. I look at Ballard and say this, Chris. Transparency, candidness as a general manager, he's top 3 or 4 in the NFL. I can also sit here and critique things and evaluate things and not let his candidness and transparency cause my glasses to be rose colored. Although I do love rosy, and I do love glasses because I can't see without them. So, again, very transparent, very candid. I thought at times there was a little bit of edginess to him. He's got a little. Hell, if you ever are in the press box with him during a game, you will certainly see that. But I thought there were a few times where he whiny might not be the right word. Probably a bad word to use, but just like none of y'all thought Michael Pittman was going to be any good. I'm thinking to myself, well, boy, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I thought a lot of people thought Michael Pittman was going to be good. There are a few of those comments where I'm like, I'm not used to Ballard kind of going down that path on an on-record sense. Is that, pissed off because he missed the playoffs and he's on edge? Sure, I don't blame him for that. It's probably a little bit from it. So, he said the finances of Wentz for 2022 would have a little bit of influence on this. But, man, there was just so many times where I thought to myself, holy hell.
Yeah.
At Sunday at 4 o'clock after that Jacksonville game, I thought 5 to 10% chance Wentz would be gone. That number, as I talked to some people and listened to some people, it crept closer and closer to like 20, 30. And after hearing Ballard, I think it's a true coin flip. And, Chris, the only reason it's a coin flip is because the who else answer, which, again, is not a ringing endorsement of what you have. So I know we got more quarterback questions coming up. We can get to those. But if you are in the Carson, or if you are looking for a nice piece of property in the Zionsville area, there could be one coming available here in the next few months. It's a little stunning to say that. But, again, I'll stand by what I said throughout a lot of the season and was exacerbated late in the season. I just didn't see the level of quarterback play that I think is necessary to win, which is a little bit higher standard than I think most. But and when I say win, win, baby. WIN 72 font. Tahoma is the font that I like to use on Microsoft Word for those curious. Bold. Win, baby. Win, win, win. Not on the couch and content with 9-8.
Clearly, we had to get to Wentz first. Like you said, the article is on 1075thefan.com. The 10 takeaways, we're not going to get to all of them. But one of the ones you did want to touch on are 2 of the bigger needs that Ballard mentioned, and they came from each side of the ball. Yeah,
let's start with tight end. He was very clear. Tight end needs work. Mo Cox, he'd like to bring back as a free agent. We'll see about the Jack Doyle retirement decision. My gut says Doyle retires. I don't have a lot of intel into that, but that's just kind of what my gut's saying. And then Kylan Granson's a guy that I thought showed a couple moments as the year went on, but I still think tight end. Agree wholeheartedly with him. It needs work. Defensive line was the other one that really stood out to me. What's interesting with that one is he kind of said D-line depth over talent. Quantity over quality was the vibe that I got. Need 8 or 9.
So kind of doing what they did with the offensive line, to a degree.
Yeah. Yes, but obviously different in how you use them on game day. O-line, you got your 5.
Yeah.
D-line, you're rotating in constantly, and I think he looks at 17 games, and you got to have a lot of depth, and certainly he talked a whole lot about Tyquan Lewis, so I should bode well for Tyquan being re-signed. Don't know if I didn't hear much of Kamoko Toure, but we'll see about that after Toure did have a career high in sacks. I understand where Ballard's coming from, quantity over quality. Like, it's a long season. The trenches have a lot of attrition. Yes. But, you also just need some studs, man. You need some horses. You can't wear people down with, a bullpen just throwing out there, lefty after lefty after lefty to get your left-handed lineup. Sooner or later, you can't rely on your defense to get ground balls and fly balls. You're going to have to strike some dudes out. You're going to have to make some just studly individual pass rush plays. So that's why I would push back on him. And he kept on saying 8 or 9. And then when I heard that, I'm thinking, well, why not bring back Autry? If depth is this big of a focus, why wasn't a versatile, proven piece who, when I talk about guys that kind of have some edge to them, might not check every single blue character box that you want? I think Autry's one of those guys. And again, I think that locker room needs it. Do you want 53 of them? Probably not. But do you need a few that's going to push some buttons? I think Autry does that in his own kind of unique way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, pass rush, he mentioned that several times, needs to improve. So, I did want to mention those two needs. Cornerback, he would like to get a little bit better there. He did point out the Colts played man-to-man a little bit more late in the year, which he was happy with, and I would agree with. But, yeah, if I had to kind of put two needs above the rest, again, in Ballard's eyes, I would say it's tight end and the depth along the defensive line.
You mentioned it a little bit earlier talking about Carson Wentz. The last one you want to talk about in terms of takeaways that Ballard mentioned was the wide receiver room.
Chris, it's he describes wideout like you've left the leftovers in the microwave and just kind of forgot about them. And then you get there and you're like, oh, boy, this isn't at the degree that I would like it to be. Mm-hmm. Do you eat it or do you heat it up again? What do you do at that point? His stressing of the need at wide receiver seemed lukewarm at best. And again, if you're Carson Wentz, you don't love hearing that. It's just weird to me. You guys have heard me talk about what I think about wideout. The final 4 teams in the AFC last year, final 4 teams in the NFL, the wideouts. How about let's look at the teams playing on Saturday, Chris? Saturday and Sunday. But let's just start on Saturday. Cincinnati, Jamar Chase, and their other wideouts.
Boyd
too.
and Higgins,
right.
Yeah.
Tennessee, A.J. Brown. The second game, Green Bay, Devontae Adams. San Francisco, Deebo Samuel. Sunday, Odell Beckham, Cooper Kupp, Mike Evans. Unfortunately, Chris Godwin can't play.
Right.
And then you look at the final game of the weekend, Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill. Those teams, all 8 of them, superior, vastly superior to what you have at the wide receiver position. He's never been a wideout guy. Never been one. And it's always been puzzling to me. Is it faith in Frank Reich scheming things up? Yeah, but that seems like a whole lot of pressure to put on your head coach. And as much as you want to scheme things up, the other team is going to scheme things up. And at the end of the day, you just got to have some dogs that win, man. And the Colts don't have that. The other thing that I thought was weird was he kept on saying that it was a hard position for college guys to make an early impact, which I see where he's coming from. Michael Pittman had a I think when Pittman came out, it was like him and what's his name from LSU? Him and Justin Jefferson. Like had the only guys in college football last year to have 100 catches and 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. Like they proved themselves more than anybody. And it took Michael Pittman a little bit before we saw it. Injury played into it, but like it's not like his rookie season was 1,000 yards and high level consistency week in and week out. So I understand Ballard on that. So then I'm thinking to myself, well, why isn't there more invested in free agency at wide receiver? And I get it. There's some wide receiver analytics and free agency that those guys don't work out. Like when Ballard has used free agency, I think he's found a lot of success with it. So I would say good amount of success with it. So I just think wide receiver is a position to use, particularly last year when you had kind of different levels of wideouts to where you find the right guy that fits your scheme, fits your system, and you go from there.
Mm-hmm.
So he genuinely likes the young guys. And like Desmond Patman and Ashton Doolin and Mike Strawn, have they had flashes in moments, games, or practice? Sure. Desmond Patman has 2 catches in his NFL career, I think. Mike Strawn didn't play the final, 2 months of the year, probably longer than that. And I don't know if Ashton Doolin's caught more than 2 balls in an NFL game in his life. Like, you want them to go from bottom of the barrel to Hilton's a free agent and debating retirement. Pascal's a free agent and just came off a very poor season for him, although Ballard, I don't think really acknowledged that too much. And Paris Campbell, you just can't trust.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't disagree more with him on wideout.
Well, someone in the local media, it might have been an Indy Star, I can't remember. I know you've had to have seen it. The pie chart of the amount of receptions per receiver this year, and just how much of that was Pittman. And a lot of the guys you just mentioned were just little bitty slivers in terms of percentage.
I know there's a stat that's gotten a lot of play of like the Colts. I think were they the only team in the league to only have 1 receiver over 400 yards receiving? I think that's a stat.
Really?
I think, and like that one is not as like bad to me as like everyone else, because like when you take quantity of yards, like obviously Carson Wentz is not going to throw for a ton of yards. You have Jonathan Taylor. It's more of the efficiency type of numbers. Like what do you do when you get those chances to make those plays? I think there's other areas you can point to that wide receiver group has struggled and has routinely been an issue. So, lukewarm at best on that wide receiver need. I would disagree with that. And I also think this is something that we'll get into as the offseason unfolds. But, Chris, you're in a position right now where you don't have that first-round draft pick. That puts more pressure on free agency.
Mm-hmm.
It just does. It puts more pressure on you to use it. And I'll hold my breath and see what happens in 2 months from now.
Well, Kev, if you have no other comments on the takeaways, we can jump into Twitter questions, because what you just talked to kind of aligns with John's first question for you.
Cool.
He felt like in the Jacksonville game, Carson did have a pretty clean pocket most of the time. With the pass catcher room needing the upgrades, which guys do you recommend to replace T.Y. Hilton, Zach Pascal, Paris Campbell, Jack Doyle? He says he wants all 4 gone in 2022.
Oh. Okay,
so
there.
A full overhaul.
Boy, that sounds like a Madden video game franchise. I know a lot of people have probably seen this by now. Have you watched the Kurt Warner video on Carson Wentz?
No.
Basically, it's Warner breaking down specifically the Jacksonville game. If you're a believer in Carson Wentz and you want to still be a believer in Carson Wentz, don't watch the video. That's my advice. We're trying to have Kurt Warner on the morning show just to kind of get more of his insight into it. Basically, it's a lot of like eyes. Carson really struggles with his eyes and making the right reads and looking at the defense and kind of acknowledging, okay, can I eliminate that, that read?
Right.
How quickly can I move on to other reads, things like that. And I will continue to come back to this, John. I have issues with Wentz, and I have issues with the wide receivers. Like, I think everyone wants to be, that's bullshit. He didn't have any wideouts, or Carson sucks, and these wideouts are fine. Guys, it can be both. It doesn't have to be just one or the other. As far as replacing all 4 of those, I mean, hell, you might get your wish on, 2 or 3 of them?
Mm-hmm.
I don't see what cutting Campbell does. I mean, he's making $1 million next year. If you have Paris Campbell at $1 million for 10 games, it's probably better than contributing $1 million somewhere else. So I'm not in like the must-cut Paris Campbell sort of things. We'll get into free agents down the road. But Chris, it does kind of bring up a point. Like if you don't have Hilton, you don't have Doyle.
Mm-hmm.
Pittman, okay, he's now in that number one wideout sort of attention role. But outside of that, Ali Cox, you're asking to make a huge jump. Granson, you're asking to make a huge jump. Wideout-wise, Doolin, Patman, Strawn, whoever else you want to throw. Like, you're asking guys to blossom into roles they haven't been asked to do. How do they react to that? Good or bad? I think that's a question mark as well.
Yeah. Next one comes from Old Daner. At what point is Frank Reich's climb the mountain idiom eerily similar to we're just going to keep chopping wood?
Ballard loves the climb the mountain one. Reich loves that, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
I've climbed Camelback Mountain. That's probably the extent of my climbing of mountains. Have you climbed anything?
No.
Yeah. I climbed the wall of Galleons once when I was younger.
See, I'm scared of heights, so I was always
I'm scared of heights
do
too. I think I was like when I was still young enough to where I didn't really.
You just kept going.
I was just like, oh yeah, I've got nothing to. I don't have kids.
That's true. At a certain age, I mean, I used, growing up, climb any tree, whatever,
sure.
and then you get to a certain age, you're like, oh no,
like,
you know what?
I kind of want to live a little bit longer here.
Yeah.
Every coach has stupid cliches. I mean,
Yeah.
Anyone have a cool one? I don't know. The first cool coaching cliche I've heard will probably be the first one. Like after a while, it gets old. I don't have it. I don't know. Maybe you change it up. Now, I do think this, and this will be kind of a common theme I come back to a lot in the offseason. Where are you going to inject life? Where are you going to inject fire? How are you going to create an edge inside of that building?
Right.
I think Chris Ballard and Frank Reich should be on a hot seat going into next season. I bet if you polled my colleagues, I'd probably be in the minority of that. If you polled fans, I'd probably still be in the minority. I think I believe the seat should be scorching hot. And I can also sit here and say, I think it should be hot, but I also don't sit here and think that like Chris Ballard and Frank Reich have done an absolutely piss poor, job and they suck and, they're going to get fired after the 2022 season. Chris, sometimes being in the hot seat can be damn good for you.
Yeah.
It makes you be vulnerable, makes you look in the mirror, leads you to think in ways you maybe didn't think before. It challenges you. And when has this football team been at its best under Frank Reich?
0-5 start.
1-4 this year.
Right.
1-5 and 18, Chris. Backs against the wall.
Yeah.
When have they been at their worst? When the bullseye has kind of been there, and they have been kind of playing with a lead, and the fourth quarter scoring. So I think it's a good thing. Send a message, have some accountability, light a fire. It doesn't mean that you're going to fire them. Hell, they're under contract through 2026 or whatever. But man, I just feel like when you say hot seat, people get all hot and bothered. Like in a company, if my wife, who's been in sales, is not meeting her quota, you think her boss is going to have a word with her?
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Now my wife is managing a team. If her team is not meeting those expectations, you think she's going to have a word with him? Yes. Like the accountability to me, I think just needs to have more of a, and that's where I feel like Irsay is kind of speaking out of both sides of his mouth, Chris. He's calling it unacceptable. He sent the letter to Colts fans, and instead of championship team in there, he puts contending team. I mean, he's kind of right, but he's now speaking out of a different side. But yet to Mike Chappell, he's calling the job Chris Ballard and Frank Reich have done excellent. Jimmy, not adding up, brother. Not adding up here. Something, both sides of our mouth. Let's have some public accountability, actions with that accountability, and let's see what happens. Because the results have been the results for 4 to 5 years. It's okay to change it up. See what happens.
Yeah, and as we see, even though you said, they're under contract till 26, look around the league right now. Look how many GMs and coaches. See ya. You don't get a lot of time to prove it anymore.
What do we got? Eight openings, is that
Yeah.
right? I think it's 4 GM openings.
I saw Eberflus and Dodds yesterday with the Bears.
Right, and I am totally all understanding of give some guys time and this and that. You want to, the Giants firing coaches after 2-2-2. Like, it's
Right.
kind of like, all right, that might be more of an organizational issue. But when you're to year 6 and year 5, which is what these two are going into, and again, the expectations are as high as they should be,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to turn up the seat warmer, baby.
Makes sense.
I've been turning it up a lot lately, by the way.
Oh,
I mean, I'm getting in that car early in the morning, and I'm like, how, I know the intersection right when it's going to get to the right temperature and everything. I'm like, how can we get it a couple of intersections before?
you got remote start at all? Do you start it and then make some breakfast and get out there? Or?
I don't have the remote starter. Yeah, I don't.
Well,
so.
here's your endorsement. If anyone out there
Yes.
is a
Our remote starter companies, if you want to be in a great market, come right here to Indianapolis, baby. Kevin's Corner it is. Thank you, Chris. You're always thinking like that.
trying to help you out. This one's from Chris, who loves the show, by the way.
Thank you, Chris.
If we get a proven veteran free agent at only one position, would you prefer it to be a number 1 wide receiver, a shutdown corner, or a stud tight end? Also, he feels like our offensive line success at guard with Golinski, Chris Reed, and Danny Pinter is fine. Eric Fisher can be cut. And when does Frank Wright just grow a pair and tell Quentin Nelson that he's playing left tackle because it's best for the team?
Okay, lot to unpack there.
Mhm.
Let's start with the first one. You say wide out, shutdown corner, or tight end?
Yes. Stud tight end.
I always have had a soft spot for stud tight ends. Maybe that's the Notre Dame kind of in me. But I will go with number 1 wide out. Shutdown corner, I did appreciate a little bit more as a man they played late in the year, but I still just don't think in that system that it's that necessary. I asked Ballard directly, Quentin Nelson to left tackle, and he cut me off before I could finish. Nope. Why would I move a Hall of Fame guard to play tackle? I've always said this about Nelson. Does he want to play there?
Right.
I feel like we never go there, Nelson was not a tackle at Notre Dame. And I can easily hear people say, okay, if he doesn't want to play tackle, then we're not paying him tackle money. All right, fine. But that's like an element to this that you have to factor in. There's no guarantee that Nelson's just going to go to tackle and play well. Glowinski is a free agent. We should note that. And Reed, actually, is a free agent as well. But Quentin Nelson is staying at left guard.
Earlier, the question from John. John thought the Carson Wentz pocket was pretty clean. Mike disagrees. He feels like, one, the pass rush was non-existent against the Jaguars. And then he says that the O-line looked like a bunch of scrubs that we took off the street. Where do you think we go from here? We have the same questions last year as we do now, and how does that make Chris Ballard look?
Yeah, it's not good. I think someone asked Ballard specifically about, I think Chat might have asked him about that, and he kind of nodded his head like, yeah, we do have the same question. I think people have often heard me on the Beers with Bowen say this. I think a big part of off seasons and drafts, especially when you have a pretty established franchise, is about passing the torch from one to the next. The idea was Mathis to Bjorn Werner. I always thought, okay, where's the left tackle going to be? Costanzo to the next one.
Right.
Reggie to T.Y., okay, that worked out better than you thought. T.Y. was a third-round pick. Now it's T.Y. to the next one. Is it Pittman? Obviously quarterback Manning to Luck is the most obvious one. But, quarterback, wide out, left tackle, D-end, and corner, those 5 are the 5 we named last year, and those 5 are the same ones now. And to varying degrees, I still think they're there. The corners, a couple of young guys I thought made some nice steps. But wide receiver-wise, you need to help out Michael Pittman. Is Michael Pittman definitely that one? I like Pittman, but there are also some times, Chris, where I'm like, man, I feel like it's been a really quiet 3 series. Where is he?
Yeah.
Is it him? Is it Wentz related? Those are kind of questions you have. So, yeah, it's a critical offseason with resources that aren't as abundant as they've been in previous off seasons. So
Yeah.
I think that's what kind of adds to things as well.
Yeah, and that was a little more salt in the wound after the loss. When you just mentioned Beers with Bowen, I was hoping we'd have one for playoffs.
I know, a little playoff one. Yeah, we got to sit down and figure out when the next one could be with that because definitely want to get those back started again.
Oh, yeah. All right, question from Jabroni. The loss was awful, but for him, a little bit of sake, he took Jaguars money line at under 41.5. So,
oh geez,
he made some good money. However, a question that I'd ask Frank Reich, and this is from Jabroni: How do you get better as a coach, continuing to have your team fail when they need to have shown? Let me start that one over. Continuing to have your team fail when they needed most shown lack of preparation. How does the coaching staff get better? How does the coach get better at situations like this?
Yeah, it's a very fair question. Again, I asked Chris Ballard. One of the questions that I asked him was just, you had a team high, or a league high, I should say, 7 Pro Bowlers.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't make the playoffs. Is that an indictment on your coaching staff? Ballard didn't really want to go there. Asked about Frank Reich and couldn't praise him more. So it doesn't sound like staff changes are happening. Now, again, inevitable coaching changes will happen around the league, and so that the domino effect will continue, and we'll see where things transpire from there. Yeah, I think the Colts do a great job, for the most part, of getting off to great starts on both sides of the ball. The issues come in finishing games. So is that an adjustment within the game problem? I think that needs some offseason work. Defensively, and again, this is under the Frank Reich watch, the development, particularly of your defensive line, has lacked. So I think that is an area that I would explore as well. And I just think if you're Frank, open-minded, it's great to have a close family tree of, I talked to Tony Dungy this day. Well, okay. Are there other peoples that might have different views than Tony Dungy on how you need to go about things? Frank has such great conviction, which is an ideal quality in many facets of life, but sometimes that thinking needs to be challenged. I think Frank is relatively open-minded and not like all I want is yes men and women in my building, but I think he could be challenged a little bit more with that. And you guys have heard me say this before. I also think when you're on game day specifically, when you're so into having to call plays and all of that, I think you can lose sight of what's going on around you. Those are some other things that I would like to see from a coaching staff standpoint of how do we adjust, how do we find a killer instinct?
Mm-hmm.
Those things I think are critical.
Tyler's wondering your thoughts on the fact that Danny Pinter played fairly well in a small sample size this year and knows that Chris Ballard thinks highly of him. Obviously, if we were to trade Ryan Kelly, that would clear up a ton of cap space. What do you think a fair return on that trade would be?
Interesting. I like this question. Will you look up Ryan Kelly's age for me? I know he's a little bit older on the young, kind of second contract scale. The Colts love Danny Pinter at center. They've always mentioned center before they've mentioned guard with Kelly, with Pinter.
28.
28. When's he turn 29?
He will turn 29 on May 30th.
Okay, so 29 before next season. Obviously, centers and offensive linemen can play well into their 30s. We know that, but the first pick that comes to mind is like a third-rounder. Contractually, still under contract for several years, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't think anything much higher than that. I don't know. Do interior offensive linemen really get traded for, higher than that stuff? I don't know. Third rounder is kind of what pops in my head. Obviously, you would save some cap space, but yeah, if you're going to tell me I'm trading Ryan Kelly for a third rounder, I think I'd probably do it.
Okay.
Now, draft capital isn't there. It would be a loss, but at the same time, I do think Pinter gives you some little bit more athleticism and space. Maybe not as much as a brawler that I think Kelly gives you. And I do like Kelly's toughness. I do think there is a lot of toughness with Ryan Kelly and kind of a hard-ass feel, which I think is important. But, you got to think Nelson's going to provide a good amount for that offensive line as well.
Right. Sticking on the offensive line with a question from Tanner, and we talked about this earlier. Should we actually consider moving Nelson to left tackle next year? It's clear that we can find guards easier than tackles, got to pay him a ton of money anyway.
So you guys obviously know what the Nelson answer was earlier. I put this as one of like the off-season storylines to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have thought I said, Quentin Nelson couldn't work at Chick-fil-A. I got some dude, I'm trying to find the comment here, goes, I respect you too much, Kevin, but you questioning if Nelson should be re-signed is disgusting. Ooh.
He's having a day.
I mean, the offseason, you ask every single question about your operation. Every single player on your roster, some are dumb questions, some are smart questions, some have debates that last 10 seconds, others have debates that last 10 days. You ask them all. That's the beauty of how long the NFL offseason is and how you've got these little checkpoints at the combine and the free agency and the draft, et cetera, OTAs.
Well, and with the hot seat, like you said, now it's time to ask even more
all.
questions probably, right?
Amen. You ask them all. How much money are we going to pay Quentin Nelson? How much money should we pay Quentin Nelson? Perfectly fine questions to ask. Chris Ballard's answer sounds like they are willing to pay him a large sum of money. Understand it. But when you, I'm just throwing out a number here. Could be dead wrong. Let's say it's $18 to $20 million for Quentin Nelson. Is that $10 million that could go to another wideout? Is that $10 million that could go to another pass rusher? And then it's, Chris Reed at left guard and Stanley Pinter at center. These are just kind of questions, debates, challenging of philosophy, all of that I think it's totally fair to ask. And the Nelson one is one that I think is okay to ask. A lot of it comes down to roster building. As much as people say, well, Polian and Ballard are on the same page, and this is how Polian built. Let's be honest, Polian and Grigson had the same approach on offensive line. Ballard has a different approach. Polian and Grigson, they wanted to go non-resource heavy in the interior of their offensive line. Ballard's the one that's I'll go serious investment there.
Right.
Now, Grigson eventually was like, God, this O-line thing, I can't figure it out. I got to draft Brian Kelly 18th overall. He didn't want to, but he finally got to that point. Ballard, he didn't waste any time. It was, because Braden Smith was thought to be a guard. So it's just kind of fascinating how all that works. I would very reluctantly give Quentin Nelson that money. Kind of crazy to say. Very reluctantly. But, the best guards in the league, Joel Bitonio and Zach Martin and Quentin Nelson, I just don't see, it's a position that you can be a Hall of Fame caliber player, and unfortunately, the debate over how much you deserve to get paid is a very fair one to have at that spot.
Yeah. All right, 5 more for this podcast. This one's from Joker. Obviously, we need another receiver to go alongside Michael Pittman, but do you think it might be time to change the play design and possibly bring in a real offensive coordinator? Joker is tired of watching our wide receivers run the same bland routes, and they obviously are easy to cover, plus the route trees just don't seem to play our receiver strengths.
Yeah, they're not changing play caller, nor do I think they should. Wideout group needs more personnel. Not going to sit here and act like it doesn't. There are schemed up plays that I see week in and week out, Joker, that have plenty of yards after catch opportunities, just aren't taken advantage of. T.Y. Hilton against the Raiders, he'd still be running if that ball was on target. There are plays certainly throughout the season that you can point towards. So I get that this is a popular one. Anti-Reich offense. Think it's too vanilla. Hate the play calling. I am not in that camp. I think you have a better than average offensive mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think schematically the Colts do some stuff that I really, really like. So I'm not going there. You need some more personnel. I'm content with what you got at quarterback. Not quarterback. What you got at play caller.
All right, this one comes from Connor, who's being very optimistic, actually, Kevin.
Okay.
First off, I'm not sure where he works, but he says he's glad nobody at his work knows anything about the NFL, so he won't get ripped into. Which
is this Connor from Ireland?
It might be.
It could be. Were you? No, you were out. So I did the podcast with Eddie Garrison, the first one back from break, and Connor from Ireland. I actually ran into him in Florida. Yeah.
You did tell me about running into. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Super, super nice guy. Hurling is a sport that I think his office knows more about.
Okay.
So yes, it now makes sense.
It does make sense because I was like, I don't know many American offices that don't know anything about the NFL.
No, that might be, if your office knows that, you really might want to work from home.
Right. Wants to know, is there any positive to be gained from the fact that we don't have a false sense of security like we would have if the Jags played terrible and we won? We should be thanking the Jags in the sense that whoever gets fired or not re-signed will be thanks to them.
I did get a couple questions like this. Connor, as always, thank you, man. Hope you have safe travels back to the homeland. Gosh, saying the homeland made me feel like I was like an accomplished, back to the homeland, like I'm some world traveler that I've been outside of the country.
When you got the Irish hat on right now, I mean,
something like that. I've gotten something of was that loss the needed wake up call? I think so much about this with the Pacers right now.
Jeez.
I cannot say this enough. This is such a great time to be a Pacers fan. Here comes change, folks. Finally change. Finally, and I guess there is some wishful thinking here. I'm assuming change is going to happen. But, running it back and believing that this is the right, puzzle pieces and all of this, finally, it's going to change. That's exciting. That's intriguing. That's what you want.
Mm-hmm.
The Colts aren't in that boat. I'm not saying that. But it is one of those things, Chris, of are the warts more obvious because of what happened against Jacksonville? Do you acknowledge things a little bit more? Are you more honest with yourself? I think there's a ton of validity to that. Now, it sucks that as a fan, you've got to take that embarrassing loss as a necessary wake-up call. I've used this analogy before about Notre Dame football in such a great, such a solid, I think, standpoint with Brian Kelly early in his tenure. He fires his strength coach, was one of his best friends in his wedding. Tough decision. Boom, they reach a higher level. Sometimes you got to make that. You got to do harsh things to. And some coaches are willing to do it, and some aren't. Jim Mora didn't want to fire Vic Fangio's defensive coordinator, and they fired Jim Mora. Some people don't want to go there.
Yeah.
But if you have a willingness to try things differently, be open-minded. Wasn't it a couple years ago that Saban was just like, all right, I've got to adopt this spread often. I've got to get to modern-day college football. I think it's worked out well for Nicholas.
Yes.
So, that's where I think there is a lot of truth to Connor's question here. Again, it sucks that it had to take that. Maybe it didn't need the magnitude of that loss, but maybe that'll send a message that'll resonate.
Stick there with things that might help resonate. Big Bama questions kind of similar in terms of the wake-up call. Not just against the Jaguars, but if what happened this season won't wake up Chris Ballard to go get a good playmaker, an elite playmaker at the skill positions on both sides of the ball to maintain success in this league, will anything wake him up, or will he just be stubborn where he's not going to tweak anything even though he's getting the same result, which is to get to the playoffs maybe and have a chance to win a game, but not a serious contender?
It goes back to a lot of stuff that we said earlier. Just never been a big wideout guy.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting to me of you feel like something that kind of maybe hold the Bears back, not having another weapon for Grossman or Orton or whoever was, the prominent QB for the Cowboys. Craig Krenzel for the Bears, not the Cowboys. During that time, Kansas City, what kind of held them back in the Alex Smith days? Is Dwayne Bowe really your number one wideout? I don't know. I'm trying to think of who else were the wideouts there for the Chiefs back then. Donnie Avery.
Yeah.
So that's just odd to me. It's odd to me. I'm not like everything must be invested into wideout. If you've got 10 wideouts, you don't, you're going to be great, blah, blah, blah. I mean, look at Arizona last night, man. You don't think the DeAndre Hopkins loss meant something to them? huge loss. I think you could look at a variety of teams that, didn't get to that level and kind of what held them back. I do think explosive offenses and how quickly the Bucs got to 30, the Rams got to 30, what Buffalo put up. You got to score some points in this league.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't think I'm wrong on this, but I don't see him wavering too much with it. So you got $45 million, I think right now it is, in cap space. We'll get into free agents more on next week's podcast. Your own free agents. Probably 6 to 7 starters on that list. Let's say you shell out money there. Let's say you find a notable defensive lineman, notable corner. There's your $45 million. Get to the second round of the draft, you draft a left tackle. All that makes sense, I think, to a lot of people. What if you get to the third round and there's a quarterback that fell that you like? Take that quarterback. So now you're going to day 3 of the draft and you haven't touched a wideout yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not that far out of the realm
right.
to me. And again, I'm trying to look at it from Ballard's point of view. So I guess I'm preparing. All of us. Brace yourself, folks. Because I think that could be where we're going.
This next one comes from Jason. If Miami goes after Deshaun Watson during the offseason, do you think Tua Tagovailoa could be had for 2 second-round picks? And if so, is he an upgrade over Carson Wentz in your opinion?
What do you think? 2 second-rounders, is that right for Tua? I would say the Dolphins would disagree because they just fired their head coach.
Yeah,
it sounds like it was a Tua Flores disconnect, or at least that played into it. What was he, number 5 overall pick?
I believe so. So yeah, I mean, it's who does the new head coach is going to have probably a big say in that,
right?
Because the whole Deshaun Watson I heard was because of Flores. Like Flores,
right. There was
a big
there.
recruiter in Watson.
I'm not the biggest Tua guy. Probably more injury related. I know his play on the field, even when he's been healthy, has not been at the level that you would want it to. I know Saban praised him a whole lot when he came out. I don't think Saban does that just to do it, really. He does have, when he is in rhythm, I think it is kind of a quicker rhythm, a little bit of a methodical kind of dink and dunk game. I probably would not do it, which Jason is really saying something, because I'm a guy that loves to look into younger quarterbacks and higher ceilings and, reasons to grow, room for growth, I should say. Like, all of that I think is pretty interesting, but I would say no on Tua.
Okay. All right, 2 more. This one's from Steven. Ever since Tony Dungy, Jim Irsay believes that a nice guy as a head coach and a good culture is the blueprint. But Dungy did have respect of people like Bill Polian and Peyton Manning as bad guys, and since there's no one in this organization to hold those players accountable, Steven just doesn't know if Frank Reich's going to get there, so he feels like we should fire Frank, bring in Jim Harbaugh. He knows that Harbaugh will wear out his welcome within 5 years, but would get Indy to a Super Bowl or 2.
Harbaugh, can you imagine? Just khakis galore in the stands, baby.
You beat Ohio State one time, and all of a sudden...
Hey, he won a big game at Lucas Oil Stadium this year. Dominated the Hawkeyes in Lucas Oil. Boy, it's a lot of good points Steven makes. I mean, Dungy had Peyton and Polian. Talk about guys that I'm sure you've heard that story, the Super Bowl story about how, hey, we're going to let families stay on players' floors, or, they can be on players' floors for a few hours. And Peyton's like, nope. You can see your families, for whatever, 1 hour and go to the McDonald's playscape. That's not happening under my watch. And that's his quarterback. The Harbaugh NFL resume is so impressive. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is. It's so impressive. It goes back to an earlier point. I think right now, organizationally, they lack accountability. They lack fire. And the Irsay all-in comment, I think, kind of plays into some of that. So I definitely hear you out. I don't know about firing Frank and bringing in Harbaugh. I don't necessarily think you're a Jim Harbaugh away from, boom, here comes Rick Carlisle. That'll save everything for the Pacers. I don't look at Harbaugh at all. I guess I look at both of those situations kind of similarly in that there's some personnel questions as well. But I do think there is a bit of, who do you fear? Players, head coaches, and we're talking about professional football players. Some tough, you-know-what.
Yeah.
I think having a little bit of fire and brimstone isn't the worst thing in the world. So maybe Harbaugh would bring that, but I tend to think if you could do that maybe a little bit more in your locker room, could resonate more.
This last one comes from Jake. True or false, the results of the season have cost the Colts a chance at contention for a minimum of 2 more years?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I mean, what do you define as contention? It just makes things so much tougher with the resources and that QB answer. So, under that boat, Jake, you are probably right of I had someone message me the other day, no matter what, you're still looking at an AFC moving forward of you have to beat out of Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes, you have to beat 2 of those 3 to go to the Super Bowl.
Just saying this, they show the graphic up on, the games coming up, and I looked at my buddy. I said, look at what all those AFC teams have in common. And look at where the Colts are.
Yeah.
You have to have a quarterback.
Right. We're not even talking about, okay, I saw a mock draft today that had, the Alabama wideout going to the Patriots. What would that do for Mac Jones?
Yeah.
Is Herbert and the Chargers going to take that jump? Was the Ravens season just a blip on the radar? What if the Steelers get Russell Wilson?
Yeah.
Those sort. Where is Watson going to go? Yeah, this was a big kick in the you-know-what season. Just losing the first-round pick, no answer on Wentz. And you also, I know it's been a popular topic. I actually think the Colts got good COVID luck. If you look at the games missed due to COVID,
right?
I want to say the Colts. I don't have it in front of me. I think it was 8 games total they missed due to COVID. Their entire roster, which I think was the 3rd fewest in the NFL. You had most teams missing, 19, 20, more than that.
Yeah, we're gonna have to move a game to Tuesday.
Yeah. So, I feel like from that standpoint, you kind of got a little bit lucky there, and just the reality of the position Jonathan Taylor plays, and those things is he guaranteed to play, every single game for you. So, I don't know, Jake. If you can find that quarterback answer, it can cure a whole lot. I think you can make a step this coming season to where you're kind of in the 4-5 range of the AFC. But right now, when I look at Cincinnati, Buffalo, and Kansas City, I see a lot of staying power. A lot of staying power from those 3. And a little bit of a tier. And obviously Kansas City, I think it's fair to say, probably on a different tier. Hopefully Buffalo can get on that tier for my financial stake. But yeah, this is a really tough one in terms of now the resources you have, where you're at, utilizing those resources. Do you get to a point now where are you running it back with Eric Fisher at left tackle? I heard a little bit of that from the Chris Ballard presser. What positions are you deciding just need to patchwork? We can Band-Aid there, and we'll kind of come back and address that the next offseason. If you run it back with Wentz for a year, and then you get to next year, and the decision's no, then where are you going at quarterback?
Yeah.
Is that having, the first-round pick to where you go ahead and find something there? So, yeah, that's a good question. I would say right now, without knowing that quarterback answer, I'd say 2 years is probably a fair assessment, Jake.
All right, that does it for Twitter questions.
Cool. And as always, thank you to everybody who sent those questions in. Mm-hmm. Always my favorite time of the week to hear from you guys and what insight you have. We've got a long list of off-season questions. We'll pick, a dozen or so each week out of there and answer those and have a new topic to get to each week on the pod. I think next week we'll look into free agents that the Colts have and guys you would bring back, guys a little bit more on the fence, things like that. Obviously, if any news breaks between now and then, we can hit on that as well. Missing anything, Chris?
No. I think you nailed it all.
He's Chris Pressey. I'm Kevin Bowen. Everybody have a great week, great weekend watching the divisional round of the playoffs. We'll talk to you next week on Kevin's Corner. This has been Kevin Bowen. Thank you for listening to another edition of Kevin's Corner. If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher for the best Colts and Pacers coverage.